My name is Rebecca Go, and I'm the director of the Office for the Common Good. We're going to continue our day of learning with another incredible workshop by St. Mary's alumna, Connie Adams, class of 2008. Connie Adams is a compassionate advocate and dynamic educator. She is passionate about the prevention and response to sexual assault, relationship violence, and stalking. For 15 years, Connie has provided advocacy and counseling services to survivors and trained groups from 5 to 500. Connie earned her Master's of Social Work from Washington University in St. Louis and Bachelor's of Social Work from St. Mary's College. I should also add that she was the inaugural coordinator of our Bravo office and worked there for 8 years. We owe her a great debt. I'm also supposed to remind you to take care of yourself today, take breaks and grab snacks as needed, and then please welcome Connie with, was it them or their trauma, understanding the impact of trauma on the brain.
Thank you so much. It is really a joy to be here with y'all today and dive in. Thanks for the really gracious welcome, Rebecca. It's my hope that we can have a really meaningful conversation and walk away with some new perspective and hope in all of this. As I begin to do workshops like these, I always take a moment and reflect on what brings me to this work. And I started to think about a dear friend of mine who I actually went to college with here at St. Mary's. And can you all hear me okay in the back? Doing that? Okay, great. Seeing some thumbs up. Cool. So I was thinking of this dear friend of mine who I went to college with. And relatively recently after we had graduated, I learned that I had some food allergies. I know this is going in a different direction than you thought. Bear with me. And she, reached out to me and said, "Your birthday's coming up. I really want to make sure that you have a dessert because I know you've got a major sweet tooth." And I said, "Not going to argue with that." So she did some research and she came to me with this recipe for a flourless chocolate cake. And I looked at it and I said, "You're amazing. And this also requires a substitute of 8 eggs." Any bakers out there? Like 8 eggs is 8 eggs is a really significant substitute. If you're not a baker, let me tell you, 8 eggs is a really significant substitute. And I explained this to her, and her response was, "Shh, I got this." And I said, "Okay, let's go for it." So she goes to multiple stores, because this was a time where things were not quite as accessible. She gathers all of the ingredients, and she puts together this concoction of this delicious chocolate cake. And as it bakes in her oven, the smell is wafting throughout her home. And when it's time, she goes and pulls out this pan of this rich, decadent chocolate goo. It's supposed to be cake. It's actually more like pudding. Now she is who she is, and so she took this and she scraped it into a bowl and she brought it to me and she stuck candles in it because, that's who she is. I mean, some people might have been like, "Here's an apple. Connie, happy birthday." But, that's not who she is. And I am who I am, and so I eat it. It was chocolate pudding. Like, anyone else with me? Like, give me some chocolate. I'm not going to turn down some chocolate pudding, right? And I share this as kind of an opening story because I want you to get a sense of who she is. And it was right around this time that she also came to me and shared that she had been raped at a party, surrounded by people that she had known for most of her life. Her brother and his then fiance were there. And she came to me because she knew I was in grad school at the time. This is the work that I do. And she trusted me to give her some advice, some perspective about where she could go, who she could reach out to. And I was really honored that she felt comfortable coming to me. And I wanted to be that support to her. But I saw what that impact was on her. And even if you do this work professionally, when you see it firsthand, when you encounter it in any kind of personal way, it impacts you in a different way. And I could stand up here and I could tell you, unfortunately, countless stories of why I'm committed to this work. She is just one of those individuals. But I think it's important that we remember that we're doing this where we're having these conversations for people, for humans, for the greater good of our community. And I want to center that for us as we're moving forward into this dialogue. So that's a little bit of who I am. And I'm really grateful. I just want to kind of get a sense of who's in this room. I'm curious. If you are a college student, raise your hand. Okay, cool. What are some of our majors of curiosity? Just called out. Social work, after my own heart. Nursing, yes. Love to have you represented. Speech and language pathology, fantastic. Okay, and we have a lot of professionals in the room. How many of you are employed at St. Mary's? How many of you are employed at another college or university? Fantastic. How many of you are other members of the community? Awesome. Good. Okay, so you've got a good spectrum of folks that are here in this room. It's always helpful to kind of get a sense of what we are doing. These are some basic ground rules. These are probably some of you have been here throughout the day. You've probably seen these. If you are familiar with these dialogues, you've probably witnessed these in the past. Listen, actively engage in a meaningful way. Speak from your own experiences rather than generalizing. We want to make sure we're valuing honesty and openness. And as Rebecca already graciously set us up for, make sure you take care of yourself. So feel free to step out at any time. Do what you need to do. Anything to add to our list here? Feel good about these? Wonderful. So our conversation today, we're going to talk about the spectrum of stress and specifically think about how trauma falls along that spectrum and the short and long-term impact of trauma. We're going to learn about the impact of trauma on the brain and discuss healing and growth. Well, that's going to be a smaller percentage of our time. I think we're going to end on a really hopeful and positive note to understand these topics. So, we're going to start at the beginning. What is trauma? What is stress? And I want us to think about the spectrum of stress. What is stress? Stress is anything in our lives that occurs that we perceive, meaning our brain perceives, as taxing. It requires more resources than we are able to offer in that moment in time. And it can result from positive or negative experiences. So, we kind of are somewhat grouped together. I want to do a little bit of an activity engagement. So, who has a piece of paper that was gifted to you by myself or Gloria? Raise your hand. Okay. So we want to, we have extra if we need it. So I want to kind of group you together. If you would mind turning around and working with Rebecca, if you all can kind of work together, kind of find a little pad. So keep your hand in your fifth so people can find, turn around a little bit. You've got one, you're good back there. Aisha has one in the back. Okay, so kind of a group together. I'm going to time you. We're going to have a little competition here. Anyone look like a competitive person like me? Yeah! Oh, we're in the back. Yes, Dr. K. Yes. Oh, kindred souls. Okay, let me turn my timer on here. What you're going to do, now draw a line down the middle of that paper, vertically, and indicate who's going to be the writer in your group. Whoever's going to be that writer. Okay. And this first, I'm just going to use one half of that paper. You can choose whatever half you want to because it's your paper. It's choose your own adventure. What you're going to do as a group when I say go, don't start beforehand. I see you. Yeah, I see you. What you're going to do is you're going to list as many different examples of life events that can be stressful. The good and the bad. On your mark, get set, go.
I'm sorry, stressful life events. So it's good or bad? Okay. So good or bad sides. What are the two sides? Healthcare, good stress, bad stress. Yeah.
Major.
Very done. Good.
Illness, major.
Oh, yeah.
That'd be good
Because every
stress.
4 years, you know,
Would it be good? That's what you asked for.
You want that one on both sides? They do, yeah. She's done thriving.
Graduation.
That's a good stress.
Financial rights. Substances, yeah.
75 seconds.
So good and
45 seconds.
they talk about stress. It's good if it is not so it's too choice of good, bad.
Raising children.
Yes.
10 seconds.
Oh,
Okay, that is time. Time. Okay. Count them up. Okay, how many of you had, oh, you still counting, sorry, I'm rushing you. Maybe you're like double check, you're like that competitive, you're like, I wanna make sure that I get every last ounce of this to count, that works, I get that. Okay, how many of you had 7 or more? 7 or more, raise your hand, 7 or more, raise your hand. If you did 10 or more, 10 or more, raise your hand, 10 or more, raise your hand. 12 or more, 12 or more, raise your hand. Could I be an auctioneer, do you think? Like, am I in the raise your hand? Maybe another career path. 15 or more, 15 or more? Keep it up. 18 or more? 22 or more. Oh, we got a couple over here. How many did you all have? 31! 37? So you're going to win an award I'm bringing to you. 37 in 3 minutes. The award is bragging rights. It just has an incredible value. Rebecca, would you mind bringing the mic over to these lovely individuals? Would one of you be willing to read them just really quickly off for us, or at least maybe your top 5 of your faves? Maybe not faves, we're talking about stressful events, but 5 that are worth sharing.
Okay, so we had finals, any type of holidays, parties, family, friends, relationships, homework, school, financial, college prep, applications, work, volunteering, siblings,
One word, siblings,
being
enough said.
taxes, adulting.
This was the identities can, depending on how that is impacted, can be stressful, yeah, in our society.
Those are just like
Those are definitely worth mentioning. Thank you. That's excellent. Appreciate you sharing with the group. Any other examples we want to call out that were not mentioned specifically? Okay, over to Phil. No, it's okay. Rebecca, it gives Rebecca a moment to She's being gracious.
Nobody said her boss.
Sounds like her boss is in the room.
Okay, we said work relationships, interpersonal relationships,
Yes.
birth, death, marriage, divorce, children,
Yes. Yes.
especially children. Oh, academic rigors, both good and bad.
Uh-huh.
Oh, like car breakdowns, things like that,
Oh, yeah.
war, peace.
Yeah, war and peace, yeah. Thank you, that's a really solid list. It's also interesting to see the different types of examples, the different direction that we kind of our brains took us in. Okay. I'm gonna let you join your seat again. But you can hold on to the microphones, we'll need it again in a minute. Okay, so we're gonna do do the other half of the paper. I'm gonna give you 2 minutes. Y'all seem like you're real smart. 37 minutes. You don't need 3 minutes, come on. So I'm gonna give you 2 minutes this time. This time, what I want you to do is write down what are the impacts of stress on us? Mentally, physically, spiritually, what are the impacts that humans experience when we experience stress? On your mark, get set, go. For some more bragging rights.
Health problems.
Yes. Psychological. Inability to sleep. You do too much.
Yeah.
45 seconds remaining.
Yeah, I'd like a satisfaction. Oh, yes. Last two. They just shut down.
And that is time. Raise your hand. 16 or more, 16 or more, raise your hand. 20 or more, 20 or more, raise your hand. Put your hand over here. 20. 20. Oh, okay. So let's do it this way. Let's start here. Would you give us 3 examples of your choosing?
Sure. We
Liz,
said
are you okay?
you can have
This
hyper
one could be
focus or
managed.
no focus whatsoever. Some sort of isolation, self-doubt, or struggling socially, or more physical symptoms like ulcers, high blood pressure, lack of sleep.
Thank you. All very true. Solid examples. And you want to give us 3 or 4 of yours, whoever would like to share with us.
So some of ours were irritability, feeling isolated or isolating yourself, yelling at your parents, like health issues, malicious anger, crying.
A whole array of emotions. Absolutely. Any other examples that we want to mention?
Can I talk about like if
if you have children, the difficulty sometimes of learning as children at that particular time too.
Yes, but difficulty is in relation to children, if you have children. Absolutely. Thank you. So we can see there's a wide range of impact here. You tied for first place, our two fabulous groups here. You also are walking with bragging rights today. Congratulations. It's a monumental moment for you, I know. So these are just, I'm sure that what you came up with falls within these categories, maybe even some other components that we can see as terms of how stress impacts us as humans. And since it impacts us in ways that we don't always realize, does anyone know the #1 presenting symptom of individuals experiencing domestic violence in the emergency department? #1 presenting symptom? Yeah. So again, it's very common, but not presenting in the emergency room for shutting down. So solid guess, Megan. It's your name tag. I appreciate that. Yes. Yes, digestive issues is the #1 presenting issue. So sometimes, right, stress impacts us in our bodies in ways that we may not even realize or even think, right? This like as a future nurse here, right?
Also gonna say like repetitiveness, they repeat themselves a lot. Like especially when you're asking like questions, oh, can you tell me where you live? Okay, yeah, I live at this yeah, I live at this place. Looking at their partner.
Yeah, so yeah, I think if the partner happens to be in the space with them, looking for that approval. Yeah. Thank you for that. So when we are thinking about how stress impacts us, we're all different people. And we all perceive and experience the world differently based upon a number of factors. So we have 3 different kind of core belief systems. So the belief system about ourselves, the belief system about others, and the belief system about the world and the way that it works. And we are constantly assessing these components based upon what we witness and we encounter and we experience in our lives. And it changes those belief systems based upon that. And we oftentimes will develop different skills to cope with the stress or our perceptions of the world in real time. And even if we may kind of step back and say, that may not be the best coping skill overall, it serves a purpose in time, intentionally. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So what is trauma? Trauma is essentially a severe form of stress. So if we're looking at what would be a spectrum of stress, trauma falls on one really far end of that spectrum. And sexual violence is certainly one of the most intimate experiences of violence that can fall on this spectrum. And because we're all different humans though, and how we respond varies, we can have the same type of encounter, but it may fall in a different place in the spectrum based upon who we happen to be. And there are a number of different factors, these are just some factors that impact what a stressful event does to us and how we encounter and perceive in our brain that event to be. The level of predictability of that event, the level of severity, and factors such as what our current experiences of vulnerability are and our current experiences of resiliency factors. So, when we're thinking about all of this, I want to start to kind of narrow down this a little bit further. So if we're looking at this spectrum of stress, these traumatic events, what are some examples of traumatic events that you can think of? So not just talking about stress, we're talking about trauma, and how that could impact us a little bit more severely. Yes? Deployments, yeah. You just call them out.
Loss of family members.
Yes, loss of family or other close friends even. Caregiving. War, absolutely. Mass shootings, all too common topics in our world. This is why I should talk and write at the same time. I'm going to start to write what I'm saying. Pretty solid list of examples. Again, And a lot of these are also things that you all have mentioned and listed when you're thinking about stress. Our brains went to this place as well. Now, everyone has trauma, and our experiences of trauma, again, even for the same events, may be different. There's a lot of different factors that impact how we as individuals experience that trauma. What is our age, our developmental stage overall? What is the level of danger that we face, either by experiencing that trauma or witnessing that trauma? If there is a person that's causing that harm, what's our relationship to that individual? Any post-trauma exposure following that event, adversities following that trauma, and also what are some of the protective factors, like who can offer protection and support and connection to us, impacts how we experience trauma. So we can't really fully judge what one experience means or what the impact is on that individual because there's so many different factors that are at play. Now I promised we were going to talk a little bit about brain anatomy. Now I am not a neuroscientist or neurobiologist. I'm a social worker, but based on the line of work that I've done throughout my career, I want to bring this forward to you all because it is really relevant in understanding what trauma means. So let's go ahead and dive in. Our brain is present at birth, but our development is not fully complete. And our brain adapts throughout our lives. We have neurons, and then we have synapses, which are the connections between those neurons, and those are constantly growing and shifting and changing. The fullest number, the largest number of neurons and synapses that we reach is at age 3, which I know is like, whoa, that was a few years ago. But the reality is that what happens is that our brains naturally go through a pruning process, which is natural and healthy. And we learn what are the connections and the synapses that we really need to function in this world. And those are impacted by whatever experiences we have, including ones that may be traumatic. This is just, there's a lot of images of the brain out there. I like this one because it's a fairly kind of basic image that's going to allow us to break down what we're really focusing on today. And I want to spend time focusing on 3 overall sections of the brain, which would be the brainstem, the limbic system, and the cerebral cortex. Now, has anyone heard of the hand model of the brain? Yeah. Couple people? Okay. We're going to learn this together. We're going to do this together, friends. So, if you were to hold up your hand, your wrist here is your spinal cord. And immediately over your spinal cord, your wrist, let's just say your forearm, I said wrist before, didn't I? I meant forearm. Then your wrist that falls immediately above that, as well as your palm of your hand, is your brainstem. The brainstem has a lot of different functions. We're going to break this down just a little bit. If you were to put your thumb over the cross of your hand, that's your limbic system. Now, for a full image, you would have 2 thumbs. Most of us only have 1. So we're going to use 1 for sufficiency. That's our limbic system. And then on top of that, if you were to fold your fingers down, that's your cerebral cortex. This is the image of your brain. This is a model that was developed by Dr. Dan Siegel. Really some excellent information out there. If you're not familiar with him, I encourage you to look him up. Our brain is developed in a hierarchical way. And so as we are developed from in utero throughout life, as well as if we were to look at how the brain has evolved historically, the brainstem is the most primal of all components of our brain, followed by the limbic system, and then the cerebral cortex. And that's how our brains develop over the course of our lifespan as well. So our brainstem. This gives and receives messages to the rest of our body. It's responsible for our heart and our lungs, for breathing and digestion, for hearing, for eye movements. It is all of kind of the instinctual aspects of how we operate as humans. Our levels of consciousness go down to the brainstem. It is very closely connected to just instincts and drives at a really, again, primal level. Then we have our limbic system. Our limbic system holds our emotions. It is in charge of evaluative functions and assigns value to things. So it determines whether something is good or bad. It assigns the level of significance to an encounter that we have in our lives. It is really vital in creating memories. So this is our limbic system, that's your thumb, and it's going over your hand, okay? And then we have the cerebral cortex. This is biologically the part of our brain that makes us most human. It's what allows us to have abstract thoughts, to have a sense of morality, to really be insightful, to integrate all different kinds of thoughts and experiences, to decipher between the past and the present, to understand the present in light of our past experiences. It allows us to be in tune to other people, to have flexibility, to be able to adapt to different people and circumstances and situations, to have a sense of empathy, including for ourselves and our self-awareness. This is the cerebral cortex. It is, again, the last part of our brain to develop and is the least instinctual. It's the most kind of conscious part of our brain, which also means that it's the last to hear about things that are happening in perceptions. So essentially we have these encounters with the world, and it goes through our brainstem, to our limbic system, and then to our cerebral cortex. With me so far, friends? Okay, beautiful. So if we were to return to this hand model of the brain, we were to think about what this means. We have an experience, and our brainstem and our limbic system are encountering that first, followed by our cerebral cortex. Now, again, all of these are ideally working really closely. It's how we're able to integrate our thoughts and experiences and messages out into the world. But sometimes when we have something that happens a little bit triggering, we have an emotion that becomes pretty strong, there's no time for our cerebral cortex to really get involved. Our brain decides based upon the situation. Really, it's our amygdala, which is a part of our limbic system. The amygdala is like the smoke detector of the brain. It really, sends those alarms off to say like, oh, something's off here. And if that part of our brain responds to a situation that it perceives as stressful, again, it's not about the full reality, it's about perception in our brains, then there's no chance for our cerebral cortex to be able to get involved. And so what happens is that we're just functioning with these two parts of our brain. And it's almost as if that cerebral cortex is no longer connected, literally. So there's not integration of those experiences in the way that we would ideally want them to be, and often can when we can think about things in a cerebral type of way. So, for example, let's say that I had an experience as a child and I was attacked by a dog. And I know that if I see my 9-year-old niece playing with a dog, that dog is not the same dog that attacked me back when I was a child. But maybe that dog acts in some way, lunges in a way, does something that immediately, based upon the core kind of part of my brain here, the primal part, feels like, ooh, there's a warden, that's not good. Then my cerebral part, I flip a lid, so to speak, that's where this term comes from, I'm flipping my lid here, and I might just swoop in and get around in that situation. So ideally, what's happening here is that our full brain isn't integrated and functioning in the fullest capacity that we can as humans, but it's functioning in the way that it can and needs to in that moment. So we may become chaotic, or we could also become rigid and withdrawn as a response. Those are kind of the two most common facets of when we're triggered in this type of way. So when we encounter some type of threat, what happens is our amygdala in the limbic system sounds that alarm, and it triggers neurons to move. And this is happening repeatedly, really quickly. Threat, response, right? And that pathway is developed a pretty strong pathway in those moments of trauma in particular. And so we're reacting to this pattern of the brain. And we want to focus here. Now, this threat, the determination of this threat, originates in the brainstem, but it moves really quickly to the limbic system. And we have this flow that happens. So our limbic system, the amygdala specifically, identifies it as a threat. It communicates to the hypothalamus, which is a part of our brainstem, and triggers the sympathetic branch of our nervous system, which then immediately releases corticotropin-releasing hormone. And combined with our sympathetic nervous system and the corticotropin, move over to our adrenal glands, which are releasing norepinephrine and epinephrine, which is where our eyes become wide, oxygen is pumping throughout our body, and we kind of start to get into a move-it type of reaction. We're ready to respond instinctually. And then hydrocortisone is produced by our adrenal glands, or cortisol, and we are able to move more into this state of rest or relaxation when this ends, to be able to say, okay, this is our state of being. We're no longer in that traumatic event. We're being able to move past it. When a traumatic event happens and we're stuck with our brainstem and limbic system functioning for us, that means that we have more hormones that are being released, and we're in this state of hyperarousal in a different type of way. And some of those different symptoms, impacts that we were talking about, continue in a much more stronger method. And my own time here for us. I love my watch. I love my watch in Ohio. It's not doing, I know, it's not doing me any good there. Yeah, that's why I have my phone. I just apologize if I'm looking at my phone. That's why I want to make sure that we're keeping on track of time. So this is kind of that overall sense. Now, if we have too much cortisol, too many hormones like adrenaline that are pumping, it can prohibit brain growth. It can actually impact for children that parts of the brain and the limbic system, develop to be larger than other parts of the brain. And we see this pretty clearly. When people think about trauma, they often think of these survival defense systems. Folks are probably familiar with the fight, flight, freeze concept. So let's talk through this. So our brain perceives that there is a situation of trauma. And immediately, our brain first moves into these mobilizing defense possibilities, fight or flight. And with this type of system, we're really hyper alert. All of those hormones are being produced in our bodies. We're ready to respond as needed, and we're assessing things. If we perceive that the threat is far enough away, we often try to flee that situation. If that threat becomes closer to us in proximity, again, all of this is based on perception, and we feel like we perceive we have the strength in that situation, we move into a fight response. If these mobilizing defenses don't seem possible, again, based upon what our brain is perceiving, it moves over to the immobilizing defenses. And freeze is what's most commonly known. And so we'll talk about that, and sometimes freeze is talked about in two different contexts, one of which actually is something called tonic immobility. Now, freeze happens when we have all of those hormones that are pumping in our bodies. We're very alert, we're elevated, we have sensory acuity that's in place, our muscles are tense, we're hyper alert, but we're not moving. That's freeze. Tonic immobility is a little bit different. It's often described as a catatonic-like state. We kind of might take on a motionless posture. We may be unable to move or speak in a situation. Essentially, our limbic system has went ahead and triggered our parasympathetic and autonomic nervous system in a way that that's the response that's naturally happening within our bodies. This happens when we have a perception of entrapment, perceive that we can't get out of where we are. oftentimes there's some type of perceived or fear of contact or restraint. How many of you have heard of survivors being in a state of experiencing some type of sexual violence, and they've talked about being unable to call out, being unable to move? This is the state of tonic immobility, which is not something that we really talk about a ton in our society. We talk a lot about fight or flight, maybe freeze. We also don't talk about the reality of how this impacts us in a very natural way. These are not choices that our body is making. This is how our primal brain is responding. It's how our brain has evolved to be able to keep us safe. So with all of this in mind, there is potentially some impact here. If there is an individual who experiences tonic immobility, what might be an impact on that individual? What would be a feeling that they have after the fact when they started to maybe recover? They're no longer in that immediate threat environment. Yeah, memory distortion. We're going to talk more about that, absolutely, yeah. Like have some memory distortion. We'll talk about explicit and implicit memories a little bit and how that's stored in our brain based upon those components. Maybe they're confused. Maybe their body's never responded like this before, like, oh, I didn't see this coming. What just happened? Yeah, absolutely. Say that again. Out of control, yes.
Maybe hopelessness?
Helplessness? And hopelessness too, yeah. Especially kind of tied to that out of control feel, like what's going on? Like I thought I had a sense of my body here and this is not what I thought it was. Thank you. Yeah, like why didn't I do anything? Maybe guilt, maybe shame, or feeling embarrassed by that as if it was like that choice that was made. And all of these things are really impactful then in that ongoing healing journey. And it's really helpful for individuals who experience any type of traumatic event, including sexual violence. The better that we're able to understand what our brain may have done in that moment in real time, the better opportunity we have for healing and growth and moving beyond that. And being able to recognize where we are. Maybe our brain goes back into this state of dealing with our brainstem and our limbic system, and we're able to really respond in a way that is healing and can start to kind of reintegrate those aspects of our brain. So you went ahead and started us in this direction, Caitlin, of thinking about memory and coding. So what do we know? We know that trauma impacts the brain. It literally changes the brain. It changes the neurons and synapses. It changes the function of how our brain is working. And a survivor of trauma can have a very difficult time recalling an experience in a fully sequential order of events. They may remember scrambled fragments. And because the limbic system is a part of the brain that is responsible for understanding kind of our senses. So think about sights, smells, sounds, colors, all of those things. Those are the types of memories that are typically encoded when it comes to trauma, because that's the part of the brain that is working, which doesn't lead us naturally to have this sequential order of events. So it's also why an individual who experiences trauma, maybe this event happens in a room that is full of red chairs. And then, years later, they walk into a room that is full of red chairs. And they have a physiological response. Their heart starts racing, their breathing changes, because their limbic system is remembering and has encoded that memory. And when we're talking about those memories, those are implicit memories, and we don't have the ability to just naturally recall them. Our body chooses when to bring them up, essentially. It's not a conscious choice that's made. We also have explicit memories in our lives, which are the types of kind of factual memories that we choose to make and the types of memories that are our choices of when and how to remember those in our brain. And we have kind of some more freedom around how we choose to bring those up as well. Questions about the anatomy of the brain. We start to kind of talk a little bit more about impact. So starting to dip our toe in here. We're going to go here a little bit further. So these are some of the immediate effects of trauma. Exhaustion, confusion, sadness, anxiety, hyperarousal, numbness or a blunted effect, being withdrawn or shutting down, unwillingness to talk, sleep problems. There's a much longer list that we could associate. These are just some of the more common types of immediate effects. And overall, you may see these immediately and more long-term. Experiencing fear. What might someone be fearful of following an encounter of sexual assault? Sure, so maybe as person or person's a type of individual that may have caused harm may become fearful. Yeah, the location or the environment that is similar to where that event happened. Yeah, so if there's a situation they encountered prior to that sexual assault that would have happened.
Maybe a smell might hurt or something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Possibly being in closed spaces, they feel like they can't get out.
Yes, feeling trapped in that way. Again, part of this is what the brain perceives as being an enclosed space. Or it could be similar, like if someone was locked in a room or in a car, maybe years later, the door on a bathroom stall is stuck. That feeling of entrapment, where it can be echoed in that type of way.
Specifically, like people with features similar to
Yeah, so if features that may be similar to that individual that caused that harm. Maybe being alone, be fearful of that. What about what they may feel angry toward? Anger was mentioned before, yeah. Angry at themselves. I let this happen, why didn't I do anything, especially if they experience that tonic, their immobility, even more so maybe. Yeah, anger at others for not intervening, getting there in time, even if there was a legitimate reason, that rational part of the brain isn't integrated in all of this, right? You have these emotions that are responding. Anger at systems. Yeah. Things that come out towards people who are helping them. Could be a nurse, could be an advocate, could be a security officer that's responding to this. That's where the anger kind of generates towards. Yeah. And these again are just common reactions, many of which you probably are familiar with. We could rattle off. I'm not giving you the opportunity for the sake of time, but I believe that y'all have a lot of knowledge, and collectively we have a lot of knowledge together. I want to break these down to give you a chance to at least break some of these down a little bit more. Specifically, I want to think about cognitions as a starting point, because there's a lot of different facets here. So this could be things like cognitive errors, misinterpreting a situation. Maybe we perceive something as dangerous because it resembles another situation that someone else may not necessarily perceive as dangerous, but based upon those past experiences, that's the case. Maybe having problems focusing, completing tasks, planning, thinking about the future. Maybe there's inconsistency in the stories that we recall. It goes back to those fragmented memories or what may or may not. If we don't have the sequential order of events, because that part of our brain was not activated, then we have a hard time being able to relay the same story over and over if different portions, different memories of those implicit memories come up at different times. Could Could be intrusive thoughts or memories that we don't really have control over that kind of take place. Poor behavioral control, poor impulse control. Painful thoughts really can go into a place of triggers or flashbacks, which we have talked a little bit about what some of those examples of those triggers could be, again, based upon a lot of times senses of how that trauma was encoded. There may be avoidance of places, of people, of things that remind us of those harmful circumstances. And there certainly can be different bodily changes, different types of illness that are developed, different types of ways that our body is holding on to that trauma physically in different ways. As just some of the common responses to trauma. Now, we're going to get to some of the good stuff, some of the hope that I promised you. I like to make sure that I fulfill my promises, and we're going to do that here. So, we've got some good news, my friends, some good news. The truth of the matter is that post-traumatic reactions can feel really hopeless. I think was the word that was thrown out there, and that's so true. And can feel like this is just, how do we move through this? But the reality is we know that we can. As human beings, we are a very, very resilient species. And as I said before, laying some of the foundation, our brains are constantly growing and adapting. We have what's called neuroplasticity, which is where our neurons and our synapses are constantly evolving and changing. And we can see this in a whole variety of ways. One of the examples of this that I really like was some research that was done around London taxi drivers. Anyone familiar with this research? So, a little bit. So to become a lucky taxi driver, it is essentially a multi-year process. There's an exam that takes place. And you have to learn all of the streets in London. You have to learn all of these different locations, the different events that happen. There's a lot of studying that happens to be able to learn this. So this study, this is multiple studies, that looked at before these individuals started studying to become lucky taxi drivers, and then after they took the exam. And these MRIs, these images of the brain, showed a change in the parts of the brain where they were mapping, where memories were happening. Now this has nothing to do with trauma, but I can't tell you how much different research is out there and all different ways that we learn and know that our brains can adapt and do adapt and grow in the ways that we allow them to. And we've seen that in cases of trauma, that when we are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder, it may be that our amygdala is really large and impacting our bodies and brains in a way and constantly triggering and throwing us off. And our hippocampus that helps us to store memories and process those memories is not working properly, that we can see that those things can actually change, that we know that there are steps that can be taken to make that happen. Now, so some of those kind of psychotherapy is one of them. There's core examples of that through EMDR, eye movement desensitization therapy, through CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, through somatic therapy experiences are some that are proven to have an impact specifically on the impacts of traumatic events. Yoga, mindfulness, writing, these are things that we as individuals can do that we don't even have to go outside of ourselves for to be able to work to have that further integration. Even if we're experiencing a moment that is not necessarily based on kind of a true traumatic event, but we're having an experience where we can recognize we're starting to flip our lid, we're starting to just kind of be reactive. Maybe we haven't eaten in a while, it's been a stressful day at work, we're fixing dinner, we're stressed out, and we just kind of start to have that reactiveness and lash out in a way that we haven't really intended to. Has anyone had that experience in their life? Thank you, people, for your honesty. Yes. So even if we just take a moment, we take a breath, we take a beat, it can allow us to start to reintegrate our cerebral cortex a little bit better so we don't just react in that way. So mindfulness activities, things that start to integrate that story, allow us to take a step in that direction. For some individuals, theater and movement can be a part of that healing process and journey. There are a few other aspects that are somewhat in the early development stage, but we know to also be true and helpful. Has anyone heard of the kinetic cone studies? These are relatively new. And what this is it's studying all of the different neurons and the connections in our brains. All of us have over 100 billion neurons. That's a pretty large number when you stop and you think about it. And the kinetic cone are the places that are differentiated in our brain that can become connected. And the more connected our brains are, the stronger our connect cone is, the better chance we have at overall well-being. And so the more that we can connect the different aspects of our brain, the types of activities that we can do that as individuals help to strengthen our overall well-being. Now, our pathways to healing can be varied for those that experience trauma. And if we are helping others who've experienced trauma, we certainly don't necessarily have control over the situation. When I'm thinking about some of those coping skills that I mentioned before, we can sometimes witness that in others, and maybe some of those coping skills are not as healthy as we would want them to be. But I want to think about this from a standpoint of kind of stepping away from kind of that lens of fear and concern. So let's say we we're by this riverbank. There's this rushing river that's flowing. And we fall into that river. And frantically, we're trying to swim, but the flow is against us. And we're to a state where we're nearly drowning. And there's this log that comes along. We grab onto that log, and that log saves our life. It allows us to stop flowing down that river. But over time, the river becomes calmer because the rain and the weather have kind of lightened a little bit. And we realize maybe we could try to get to shore now. And there are people that are on the shore that are yelling out and saying, let go of the log, let go of the log. And we want to let go of that log. We realize, okay, maybe we could, but that seems really scary and really difficult. But over the course of time, we realize, okay, I'm gonna float for just a minute, I'm gonna let go. And then we realize, okay, we gotta hold on, we're not quite ready yet. And then we say, okay, we're gonna float, we're gonna swim, we're gonna tread water for a little bit. We gotta go back, we gotta hold on to that log. And eventually, over the course of time, maybe we are able to let go of that log and safely get to shore. But it's a process and a journey for us to be able to get there. And a piece of what can be really helpful in that journey is what needs to be addressed relationally and the connections that we have. Just as the connections of our brain are a core to being able to heal, the connections that we have with other individuals relationally, family, friends, and therapeutically make a huge difference in understanding how we can grow and allowing for those connections to happen in a safe environment to allow that brain to grow and adapt in, pardon me, a meaningful way. Talking and reconnecting to other people can be a significant part of that healing journey. We can't minimize what that means. I want to stop here so we have a little bit of time for questions. I'm just going to put this quickly here. This is a lot of information, some of which may be new, some of which may be somewhat familiar, some of it piecing kind of together. But I want to leave a little bit of space for questions. We have about 5 minutes, and I want to give a break before the next session that starts at 3:30 for those that are here for that full day. Any questions based on what we've talked about, or comments based upon your own experience? Sure. So freeze is a state where, so the question was, can kind of identify the difference between freeze and tonic immobility. So freeze is a state where our body has become hyper-alert. So our senses we're aware of what our exits may be. We're aware of the blood that's flowing through our body. So maybe our muscles are tense still. We're in a state of where we could move if we need to. But freezing is the choice that our brain has made in that moment. When it comes to tonic immobility, that is a state that's more of being catatonic-like, not being able to talk, not being able to move. Our body isn't in that hyper-arousal type of state. So it's often kind of a different kind of freeze if we were to say that. Does that distinction make sense? A little bit better? Great question. Thank you. Oh, Rebecca.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate this in the Medicom study you talked about.
Medicom?
Medicom.
I know, yeah.
There's a lot of work being done in the local community about trauma-informed care, and there's a new group developing what's called the self-healing community, and it's less of, it's like not actually an organization. And around here we always are like, let's start another nonprofit or whatever. It's not. It's about forming more connections, because if the things are not well connected, then people fall through the cracks. But if things are better connected, then there's more resiliency and you can bounce off it better. And so it reminded me of that same idea of like here, even on campus, the more of us who are trauma informed and aware, the better we can support. So it's not all doesn't all fall on the Bible person or whatever person, but that we are all supporting each other in this way that is trauma informed. So yeah, thank you.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that kind of correlation. It's good work happening. Well, if you're a part of it, you were doing it. So.
So very funny if you could talk a little bit, and I don't know what kind of research is out there on this. I'm just, I'm, I guess, intrigued by sort of the idea of when the trauma happens in one's life, right? So, for instance, I would think I have 3 very distinct traumatic experiences in my life. One was when I was a kid, I was 8, and then the other 2 were in my adult years. I feel that, and I feel like the trauma was fairly equivalent, especially for the, so I don't feel like there was one that was just extremely severe versus the other, considering the age ranges. But I feel like the one that happened as a child was probably the one that I've had the hardest time to kind of be able to recover from. So I guess what I'm curious about is there are studies out there that kind of shows based on when it occurred, sort of how children particularly overcome traumatic experiences versus adults. I know it's a case by case situation, but I don't know, I'm just wondering if there's anything out there to share about that.
Yeah, so certainly there is a difference in experiencing trauma as a child compared to adulthood. Part of it is that children's cerebral cortex is very far underdeveloped. We know that the cerebral cortex isn't fully developed until like the age of 25. And so the younger that someone is in experiencing trauma, the less developed that cerebral cortex is. And the more functioning that's happening from the brainstem and the limbic system. And so when that's the case, that trauma becomes encoded in a different way even. And we have less awareness and ability to integrate that cerebral cortex. So there is definitely some research there around the younger the age, what that means. And there are a lot of different factors that vary based upon individual. What is the relationship, if it's a person that's causing that harm, what's the relationship to that individual that causes that harm is one. Thinking about different types of overall developmental stages and resourcefulness that we have depending on the age. What are the connections to adults that we have? There's certainly something to be said about if we experience trauma as a child and we're able to process that through and have a connection and a restored trust with an adult in our life, how that impacts what our experience of trauma is. None of this is a guarantee because all of us as individuals are so drastically different, and where we are physically, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, developmentally, all of these things are factors that then impact how that plays out. And so, are folks familiar with ACEs, adverse childhood experiences? There's a lot of work that has been done that the more ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences, which are essentially forms of trauma, many of which we listed or saw on the screen earlier, the more of an impact, the different kind of impact that has on us and our overall development of our brain, of our physical health. There's a lot of ties to addiction, there's a lot of ties to other types of long-term chronic illness. So there's a lot of research really outlining exactly what you're talking about from a personal level, but looking at that kind of reality. So I think what I can say is that this personal experience we've seen through research and studies, absolutely. I don't know if that helps provide a little bit of context.
No, I was really curious too about the brain development at the younger age, which you covered, so that's helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome. There was a hand. Did you have a hand? Hand check. There we go.
There's a couple of things on the list that I went from my personal experience, I went in a lot of this trauma where my husband was very brat, so I moved around a lot and I was in play, my parents in play. And so a lot of those things I don't associate with being traumatic, that might also be I feel like I'm being desensitized to it. So what category would you desensitization or separating oneself from the typical emotional response that we would expect versus actually
So I think there's a couple of pieces that are part of what you're bringing up. So the example of moving around a lot, you shared you're a military brat, so that isn't necessarily identified as an experience of trauma for you, which is very possible because trauma has to do with how we experience that, how we as individuals, how our brains respond to a given situation. I could experience the same type of circumstance that you do, and I can have a different impact. It can be traumatic for me and not traumatic for you. So there's not always a guarantee. Again, there's a lot, that kind of goes back to those initial factors of stress that we were going to be talking about initially of what's the predictability, what's the severity, what are the hormones that are happening in our body when that traumatic experience happens. There are so many different facets at play. What are our past experiences or other experiences with trauma that impact how our brain integrates that? So it is very true that just because it was listed doesn't mean that you experienced it as traumatic or to the same degree. Or maybe there was an experience of trauma, but because there are other parts of your brain and environment and relationships, you're able to move through it in a different way. So I will say that kind of as a starting point, and that's true for any individual. And then we have kind of the part around desensitization that you mentioned. And certainly that can be a facet of how we experience. It's a coping skill that we can develop in our lives. And so there can be a factor of that certainly plays into what our experiences of trauma as well. So to answer the question to some degree, yes, all of those things can be factors. And again, it doesn't just mean because it's listed on the slide that it automatically is an experience of trauma. Thank you. I really appreciate your willingness. I want to make sure that folks have an opportunity for a break. I know this is a really long and wonderful full day. And so I want to kind of stop our dialogue here. I am available as well for some additional conversation if folks have additional questions that they want to share. But I really want to thank you for diving into this topic with me. I know that it is one that is intense in a lot of different, and I mean in a lot of different ways. And so pat yourselves on the back for engaging this dialogue. And I know we have some additional wonderful conversations and sessions that are going to be happening. So go ahead and take a break. The next session is scheduled to start at 3:30. So go ahead and take a breath if you're able to join. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day as well. So thank you.